on that date, and he had the date because the Israelis had calendars and they wrote it down. That's a pretty important deal. I mean, you know, if you're Moses and something important happens, you tell the scribes, hey, write this down. This is important. So they had written records and they had a calendar. Velikovsky said if that happened over the Sinai Desert, then the sun must not have come up in China the next morning when it was supposed to come up. And the Chinese had scribes, the Chinese had calendars, and guess what? The sun didn't come up the next morning when it was supposed to. Verifying scientifically the Bible and verifying scientifically what really happened. The Israelis did get that extra 4 hours of daylight, and the Chinese didn't have the sun. Of course, the sun couldn't come up because the planet had rolled over in space. And that's why the Israelis, and God can make that happen. And he did make it happen. Now, Dr. Velikovsky wrote a number of books. Now, what I'm going to quote here word for word is a quotation from one of those books. It's titled Earth in Upheaval by Immanuel Velikovsky. Now, what he's doing here is giving this is one page of one book. One page of one book. He's giving a very compact, highly condensed observation of what happens in a pole shift. Observations based on what he found going around the planet and finding the evidence. It's titled A Working Hypothesis. Let us assume as a working hypothesis that under the impact of a force or the influence of an agent, and the Earth does not travel in an empty universe, the axis of the Earth shifted or tilted. At that moment, an earthquake would make the globe shudder. Air and water would continue to move through inertia. Hurricanes would sweep the Earth, and seas would rush over continents, carrying gravel and sand and marine animals, casting them on the land. Heat would be developed. Rocks would melt, volcanoes would erupt, lava would flow from fissures in the ruptured ground and covered vast areas. Mountains would spring up from the plains and would travel and climb on the shoulders of other mountains, causing faults and rifts. Lakes would be tilted and emptied. Rivers would change their beds. Large land areas with all their inhabitants would slip under the sea. Forests would burn. Hurricanes and wild seas would wrest them from the ground on which they grew and pile them, branch and root, in huge heaps. The seas would turn into deserts, their waters rolling away. And if a change in the velocity of the Earth's rotation, slowing it down, should accompany the shifting of the axis, the water confined to the equatorial oceans by centrifugal force would retreat to the poles, and high tides and hurricanes would rush from pole to pole, carrying reindeer and seals to the tropics and desert lions into the Arctic, moving from the equator up and down the mountain ridges of the Himalayas and down the African jungles, and crumbled rocks torn from splintering mountains would be scattered over large distances. And herds of animals would be washed from the plains of Siberia. The shifting of the axis would also change the climate of every place, leaving corals in Newfoundland and elephants in Alaska, fig trees in northern Greenland, and luxuriant forests in Antarctica. In the event of a rapid shift of the axis, many species and genera of animals on land and in the sea would be destroyed, and civilizations, if any, would be reduced to ruins. It paints a pretty bleak picture, and hopefully that won't be what we're in for. I can't stand here and prognosticate exactly what we're in for. I can tell you for a fact that the federal government has been spending hundreds of millions of your tax dollars getting ready for this since at least 1979, at least. That the Fortune 100 companies, or at least many of them, I don't know which ones, but many of them know about this. The major governments know about this and are making preparations. China and Russia both know about this and they're taking what precautions they think are important and need to be done. There's a lot of people and a lot of entities that know about this. Now, the 2 DVD sets I've got out there talk a lot about preparation in the general sense of the word. There's a lot of overlap in preparedness. If you're prepared for a major earthquake, you're pretty much prepared for anything. If you're prepared for a major terrorist attack, you're pretty much prepared for anything. But there's some differences that we're going to cover right now about dealing with what we're looking at here. Anybody here watch Little House on the Prairie, Michael Landon? Okay. Okay. Life on the Kansas prairies in the 1880s, 1890s. In the 1880s, 1890s, we had a complete working infrastructure in this country where goods and services were produced and delivered. Commerce took place. We had a postal system. We had law enforcement. We had the military. We had medical care. Bulk goods were produced and delivered and transported, none of which used internal combustion engines. None of it. None of it. No internal combustion engines. It was all people power, animal power, and steam power. That's what made that infrastructure work. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we may be going back to the 1880s and all that infrastructure is gone. Steam engines are pretty much in museums and not available to the rest of us to use, although I'm working on that. Horses, there's a lot of horses around, most of them for pleasure use, not many would be used to or are suitable for pulling heavy wagons, although I guess they could be adapted for that. And what wagons do we have? That whole infrastructure of cargo wagons pulled by horses is pretty much in museums too. Sailboats, bicycles, steam-powered cars, steam-powered boats, steam-powered tractors. That's what we'd be looking at eventually. On my website, you'll see steam engines built by Mike Brown. And I'm working with another manufacturer who's doing something nobody's ever done that we're aware of, and that's fabricate complete steam electric generating sets mounted on a flatbed or an enclosed trailer where it's all one package. So if you have wood or anything that burns, and if you have a little bit of water, you can have electricity. And that's a nice thing. Electricity is a good thing. And trying to operate communications equipment without electricity simply isn't going to happen, not very effectively anyway. There are some crank-up receivers that you can get, which I have a couple of them myself. Steam power is the way large amounts of electricity have always been generated. A lot of people don't know this, but this young lady might know here, but a nuclear submarine is a steamboat. An aircraft carrier is a steamboat. A nuclear power plant is a steam-generating power plant. That's the way large amounts of energy have always been made, because of the incredible torque and energy you get from expanding steam. So that's hopefully will be available soon, where people can get access to steam energy and steam engines. We already can get the engines, but the boilers are the hard part, and the man I'm working with in Minnesota is working on getting these boilers ready to go, and we're right at the cusp of being able to offer those. Getting access to modern medical care, which I don't advocate except for emergency use, and modern dentistry, which I do advocate, could be very difficult, if almost impossible to do in a long-term crisis. If you need pharmaceutical products to live, you need to look for alternatives, because access to pharmaceutical products is probably going to be cut off. Getting those concerns taken care of now while you can is an important thing to do. Getting those dental concerns taken care of, stockpiling prescription pharmaceutical products if you need to do that. In a long-term severe crisis, as I mentioned earlier, if somebody wants what you have, whether it's your food or your teenage daughter, you're going to have to be the one stopping that person yourself. That means learning to use firearms and be good with them, being prepared to use deadly force to protect your loved ones. All right. Most people, if you try to talk to them about this, aren't going to want to hear it. I wrote this paper, You Have No Need for Panic, for my brother and my brother-in-law.